going to talk about institutions some more in this part 2, but first let's go to the conversation in the chat. What's the meaning of undercommons was the question, and undercommons. So I think, as I understand it, commons, which is a very popular word right now, is what we share in civic life, society, right? The common, but not even civic life. Maybe that's wrong. In the commons is what's available for all of us in life, right? So, and it's a critique of the way in which some parts of the commons of human heritage, if you like, have been privatized and owned. It's like science, for example, that belongs to humanity as a common, we have a common interest or investment in that. Investment, not in the sense of like finance investment, but in our interest. It's in our interest to know about knowledge, to have knowledge, right? But companies like now to keep knowledge to themselves, and that's not common, not in common. So the commons is what is available for everyone, potentially, even though privatization means that sometimes the commons is not, it's fenced off and excluded. The commons means that land in a village that is not owned by anyone, really. Now, the undercommons that Moten and Hani talk about will be the class of people that in the commons, but they don't have any real status there. They're kind of well, they're not recognized as having, they're the underclass, so to speak, of the commons, the part-timers, the peripheral workers, the unacknowledged workers, can you think about it? The university is a common, right? It's available for all of the society, but of course, it's also hierarchized completely, more available to those who have a position of authority as a teacher or administrator, or students who have paid to have their way in it. And there are others, many other kind of workers in the university that you wouldn't say the university is for them, they just work there, but it is for them as well, and they're invested in it. And like as a collective of workers, it shouldn't be that the university is just for those that learn, those that teach, but it's also a community with many others. I mean, I think everyone should be learning and everyone should be researching in the university. So there be research that is a great resource potentially, that those who do the cleaning or working kituksa could also be researchers in food processes or environmental stuff as well. Of course, they'd have to be paid in a different structure and not work to such hours, and it's not going to happen anytime soon, but it would be a different way of organizing the institution. So that's what the undercommons, as I understand Moten and Hani, refer to. Those that are, I guess, the underworld of the global university system in the university. And that applies to every level of institutional, every institutional level. If you think that the commons is humanity's common interest in knowledge, for example, then the research councils that decide who gets funding and so on, or the organizations that rank universities according to different criteria, are also providing a resource or a service that should be for everyone. Of course it's not, because they have to have criteria, and you can't just roll up and say, I want some money to do research. You've got to show your credentials. That itself is a system worth examining, worth thinking about critically. That's what I'm suggesting, is that all levels of institutional operation need to be critically evaluated. And we have some systems for doing that in place, but maybe we can have better systems in place by doing it ourselves, rather than having some kind of outside. Yeah, I don't know, the debate about how you do evaluation, criticism, self-criticism, or auditing is long and large and ongoing, I hope. Let me go back to my slides and see where we're at. Okay, so in this section, I'm starting off by talking again about ranking. And famously, right, TDT in the top 800 of the world university rankings and so on. But now I'm interested particularly in how this ranking game operates, right? So we talked about a game in the first section, the game of exposing the university. The ranking game, it's not really a game, it's very serious and big stakes are involved, but how does one win in this global system, right? And the ranking is based on a model, if you like, an idea, an ideology, an idea of the university that's not really explicitly, maybe it could be better described, let's say. I want to suggest that the ranking system as we have it right now is very normative. Normative. By that I mean that the ways in which it talks about quality and its idea of what quality is, what a good university is normative in the sense of it moves everyone towards similar ideal, a center of the university that's kind of modeled on Oxford, Cambridge, Oxbridge, right? That university, the prestige of those universities, which I think is not any longer justified, is that they've given the model of what ideal researching university will look like. And the thing is, there might be other possibilities. Now, to rise in the rankings, the more that you can, there are kind of two kinds of strategies, I guess. One, you have the plan of making what you're doing as much like Oxbridge standards and quality and so on, a best practice, so to speak, as you can, right? And then you do rise to the extent that that's recognized. To the extent that you don't waver from the plan, you can go to become the Oxford of the East or something. You know, we might talk about that as a model for university. But of course, then you are trying to compete with the establishment and everybody else who's trying to be like that, to compete on the same ground. So the other strategy that a university can have, or a department can have, or a researcher can have, is to, instead of being conventional or normative like everyone, they can offer something really unique and then rise because they're offering something that other people are not offering. It's an unfortunate fact that the global system has structural inequalities that will not disappear overnight. I mean, it's a very slow process of getting this sort of, well, it will be a very slow process. We will see a change, I think, but the dominance still of the European model of the university, which goes back some 800 years to Bologna. I know there were kind of universities in Asia well before that, like thousands of years ago and so on, but they are kind of college, and the Greeks had the Agora and Plato and Aristotle. And so. But the idea of the university in its current form goes back about 800 years to Bologna, a Bologna model in Italy, where interestingly, it's very different to what we have now. There, students voted and paid directly for their lectures. So a lecturer was kept on year after year if the students coughed up money and gave it to them. There wasn't the kind of system we have now of tenure. Well, we don't have it anymore even, but there was not a direct correlation between you paying your fees and the staff member keeping their job. There's some connection still in that. You keep a job in the university if you have good evaluations from students. But the model of having university divided into faculties and different areas and a lecture and tutorial format pretty much hasn't changed for 800 years. And there are some who say that the lecture, what we're doing right now, is not the best way to convey information. I would question, first of all, whether it's information that we are even in the business of conveying, rather than critical thinking about information. Information is available to everyone now. You just search Google, you get it. But how to handle that information, how to think critically about it, is something else that I think myself still that the lecture format is can be, not is, can be, sometimes can be conducive of, can be helpful. All right, there are other things though. We can talk about disrupting we call it flipping the classroom, right? Flipping the classroom refers to turning the classroom on its head, so to speak, so that you no longer have one person with authority speaking, but everyone speaks, and you get rid of the tables and chairs, and you sit in a circle and so on. These go back to 1960s experiments with the hippies in California and the teaching and so on, which is an interesting history. And we do include that. I do include that myself in flipping the forms of assessment, so that your report might take the form of a diagrammatic or a mapped or a zine or something like that. In this class, probably zines. Then it's not to flip the classroom essay format of teaching, but on the whole, it's still the dominant model, and we are not changing it anytime soon. All over the world, there are universities where there are lectures going on, and students are listening, and then they're preparing their assessment, doing exams and doing essays as ways of showing their knowledge. My idea is that there are other ways of showing your knowledge, but on the whole, the essay is still there. Now, how in this global system where everything is normative, going towards the same model, might you try and do something else? I mean, places like some places, big important places, have tried to challenge this model and show that they're doing something unique and have been quite successful in it. Melbourne University, for example, it doesn't allow its undergraduates to have separate disciplines. They have a common first year, right, where everyone does the same set of courses, so they get a broad education. It's not such a unique thing, but they can point to themselves being different to the convention. I mean, they're a bit more like Oxford and Cambridge than I would like to see, but they have taken what their offer is, thought about their offer, and thought, how can we position ourselves as doing something different to all the others, and yet still have that quality of scholarship and so on. I mean, this is the thing, to rise in the rankings. What do? You play the normative game, or you play normative plus some unique parts. And if you're going to do that, you have to think very carefully about what it is that you as a university, what it is that we as a university offer that's distinctive, and not dilute that. Not allow the normative thing to turn what maybe is a unique selling point, USP, of the the education system you have, not dilute it in the face of the global normative model of the university. So thinking about that, what's distinctive, and extending that, emphasizing the distinctive in areas that warrant that extension, and so on is important. Thinking about this, there's kind of national questions that could come up. The national university system, maybe there's a unique thing in the style of writing, passionate tradition, a poetic voice. Think about, I don't know, the French tradition and its concern with literature, or the Polish, or the poetry, or the I don't know, Zen of Japan, or something like that. Or in sciences, you could stress your unique model of what we're going to talk about next week, for example, is the science park model, the intensive hotspot of research in the think tank, and so on, which is a stressful but creative response to the idea of having discipline. And we talked about it last week. Another unique possibility is to say, well, we don't organize around disciplines, we will organize around projects. And then to trade on the enthusiasm of that collective work, of project work, could be one way of rising in the ranks. So, you know, when you think about university in Vietnam, how we are talking about internationalization a lot, we have to ask the question, what's unique about Vietnam that can inform the conversation about our involvement in global university models, right? How do we maybe define or find and define and name what could be unique about the university in Vietnam, right? And what would be its character, and how to keep that character, not to dilute it as the normative pressures to get accreditation, to follow the format and structure of the Bologna model proceed. Right? And especially as international universities come and relocate here in Vietnam as well, where the choice is being given to students: go to a national university or go to one of these foreign parachute in ones, and the range of offers is up for grabs as well. It's affected by student choice, but it's also affected by global ranking. And then if we had a unique and if we had a shared understanding of what is unique about a unique selling point, for example, if we were able to say what that was, I mean, I think there are several, right? But we're not talking about the specifics. We're talking about the idea of having something that makes you distinctive. You then have to be able to communicate that to the system that is normative. To say, well, we do good scholarship, but we also have this unique aspect. Right? And how do you get that into the international conversation? So, like you saw, one way of trying to do that, to say, you know, we've taken the idea of everyone as a researcher, and so we're putting that out there for discussion without selling it or selling it, putting it into the market. Is the education a market? There are so many questions, right? So, you know, we first of all, we have to raise the question about how we present the university experience in Vietnam, or even to decide for ourselves whether there was something Vietnamese about it, right? Or there is anything nationally distinctive and unique that can be presented to others, if it can be. I mean, that's the choice. You either completely replicate the global model, and the extent to which you do that well will take you up the rankings, or you do that and have a unique selling point, which is going to potentially have you up closer to the top, because you're not just going to be a local version of the global norm. would be a locally attractive and exciting alternative to the global norm. And there's big questions. They are at that global level of ranking, but they go all the way down. So do you write, for example, your essay exactly as it's presented in the how to write essay notes and so on, the normative, right, with the beginning, middle, and end in that order, and so on? Or do you master that system and then do something unique, something creative, and something, and you know that the one that masters the norm but then can do something extra is the one that is worth doing, is the one that will get attention. Okay, and then how do you present that to the community where the conventions are set, and how do you do it in interesting ways? And the conventions are set. There's so many conventions. We have our own versions of what every other university has, like a slogan. We talked about slogans, right? And these could be empty, but they are attempts to show what's unique, or show what is being done in the university. And okay, we could talk about literacy, how important the literacy campaign was in Vietnam, right? After World War II. How significant that was, or socialization campaigns. We could talk about these things as potentially unique and interesting. Or we could talk about one thing that I've seen discussed, education for all, care for all. That model is an alternative from the undercommons for the university. All right, and then the questions come down to what it is that you put in your curriculum. Is it a curriculum for global integration, and to what extent is that globalized? Is it completely just global, or is it a Vietnamese version of global, or is it some other criteria that decides how you do school, private or international? And how do you run your management, or how do you govern the university? I'm not going to get into that set of questions right now, because that's really at issue here. And this question of the unique selling point is effective in the context of what we've been talking about a lot, the brain drain. But it also is where we find questions of accreditation and bureaucracy. How do you get something unique through a system that is looking for things to conform to a convention? Right? How do you do both those things? Show that you're doing best practice, normative stuff, and yet doing it in a really interesting and new and challenging way. Okay, forget about 5 here, overseas consultancy and placements. That's thinking about how it is we train staff members and so on. I mean, what is it that our staff are taught, are trained to do in terms of how they present education? Are they going overseas for their degree or for consultancy or placement or something, so that they come back and replicate exactly what they saw over there? Or do they negotiate some kind of dialectical exchange between what's seen as best practice and what's unique and available? These are not questions with answers necessarily. They are things to make you think about what it is being presented as university. Yeah. What is the university? Okay, I wanted to say another factor, a big factor that's shaping how the university, not just TDT, how any university plays the global ranking game is to do with how research funding is distributed, right? How sorry, my phone's being silly. How hi, look, hi, I can't talk right now. Sorry. 3 calls. Excuse me. Distraction. All right, so no, the next part that I want to get onto is thinking about how the research councils, those that deliver funding, shape ideologically, in terms of what's expected, shape knowledge, and by determining how one goes about doing research, like the criteria for doing research, what counts as knowledge, what counts as research, is shaped largely by who provides the funding, who sets the funding, and the criteria for getting that funding. Okay, so it's like I said before, you can't just rock up and get research money, right? You have to show a certain set of normative qualities, fulfill certain criteria, that you are a legitimate researcher or a legitimate research institution that's worthy of getting money to do research. And that needs to be examined because it's an ideology as well. The way in which the research councils that give out research money determine who and what is a researcher then has flow-on effects to how individual academics shape their careers, shape their self-idea, their identity as researchers, which then flows on to how they think about knowledge and how they teach. So there's which affects what happens to students in the classroom, because they are subject to what the researcher chooses and how the researcher chooses to teach. So there's a direct connection between what happens in the classroom and what happens with the global research funding bodies, that they set and shape the definitions of what it is to do research and what makes a researcher, and that gets researchers and institutions like the university to conform to that model, and that affects how we then pass that model on to those we teach. So there is a direct thread, if you like, from the classroom to the global research body. Now, I've been looking at recently one of the research bodies, and I'm going to look at that now for a little bit. It's called Erasmus, and it's a European research body. They have a capacity building project, which is something I want to apply for funding for, right? And it's all of the problems that we're talking about right now. Critical thinking is required to think about what we're doing with this. Erasmus, you have a picture of Erasmus himself. He wrote a book called In Praise of Folly, Praise of Madness. He was really a creative thinker, and Erasmus thinks itself as a creative project. And it's been really quite good for European students to move around and so on. But now they have this project, which some might think is a bit colonial, but a project to help universities all around the world, but especially in so-called developing countries, to build their university research capacity. And what's not said in that sentence is a little subclause at the end, according to the model of the European Research Councils, right? According to our idea of what a researcher is, not your idea, not, according to the normative. Okay, but except that, they've got the money, we want the money. We want to have capacity, we want to use money to build capacity because looking at the stats we looked at last week, right? Vietnam needs researchers, needs accredited PhD level teachers and researchers coming into the university system because there's demand and a growing middle class and so on. So we would like to build capacity, and maybe we should look at this particular research council and research fund to see what kind of things they will pay for in order to build capacity in Vietnam. So let's look at their website. But yeah, just leaving this Erasmus, in praise of folly, he was really the guy for creativity and innovation. And that's interesting because innovation, it's sort of this word that means, you innovate by making everything really different, but innovation is also a key word for capital nowadays. To innovate means to get new products and so on. Anyway, Erasmus was like 400 years ago. In Praise of Folly is an amazing book, worth reading, but very philosophical. Folly of follow your creative instinct, follow even into your idea into worlds that seem completely absurd because you may then hit upon something new. In some ways, these research councils don't let people do that because you have to be very conventional to get the fund. Anyway, let's look at their website. Here it is. Welcome Europe. 18 years of experience in obtaining European grants. This is the Erasmus program. And I've been looking at the Euro funding toolbox. Don't know if you can see my arrow on the screen. I don't think you can. You see in the top, like the third strap from the top, a list of a menu list. Euro funding toolbox is one of them. There's training, consultancy, references, and so on. And the key action I'm looking at is Erasmus Plus. Key action 2. An action is a project, their code for a project, and it's capacity building in the field of higher education. But actually, when I drilled down in this, it turned out that, where is it? Well, I don't have that particular page. Why can't I? All right, stop sharing there. I didn't have that particular page, but the capacity building project is right now not agreed by the European Union. Okay, so it's not ready to, I'm sharing again, right? It's not ready to, there it is. It's not ready to, I can't search anything for 2021. I can only search 2014, 2020, right? Because this is, they haven't updated it for this year yet. They're supposed to have updated it February 15th, but they somehow haven't agreed. I think because they've had to rewrite everything because of Brexit. British have left the European Union, so every policy document has to be changed somehow, and they just haven't done that yet. But we can look at last year's stuff, so I dug that out, and we can see what the aim of their project is. Capacity building projects in the field of higher education. You could read this out. And somebody is trying to call me madly. I can't talk. Capacity building projects in the field of higher education are transnational cooperation projects, right? So transnational cooperation projects. So the idea is a cooperation between someone in Vietnam and someone somewhere in Europe, right? Based on multilateral partnerships, primarily between higher education institutions from program and eligible partner countries. Vietnam is an eligible partner country. So we need, obviously, what we're going to do is look for a partner, TDT, as from the partner countries, and from a program institution. So someone from the European Union, and we've got a few candidates, Antwerp and Leipzig and a few others. The aim of these projects is to support eligible partner countries, which will be us, to modernize, internationalize, and increase access to higher education. Access is a really big code word for European universities. What does it mean? It means that not only the rich get to go to university, that they're trying to scale up so that at least 50% of the population of any country goes to university, of teenagers, of 18-year-olds or whatever. And so access is kind of supposed to be this progressive, multicultural or anti-racist thing, but quite often it's still the very well-to-do, even though they might be of some non-Aryan background. Anyway, internationalize is obviously the global model of university, and modernize, which is a kind of, what does modernize mean? It means to introduce new tech. It means to follow the best practice. And what they say of best practice is not neutral, right? I mean, what's the criteria for saying what is best practice, right? You might think that best practice is not doing things with search technologies and Google and so on. It might be some really intensive, close reading of these archaic things called books. Anyway, what is to modernize? Second, to address the challenges facing their higher education institutions and systems. I sent you an article on the Google Classroom that talked about some of the problems with higher education. That was interesting because it seemed like that was responding to exactly this issue. What are the particular challenges for higher education institutions and systems in Vietnam? The obvious challenges already identified by the government. We talked about last week, like not enough staff members with PhDs and so on are there, but there are other challenges. Increased cooperation with the EU. Of course, they only offer money if it leads to business, right? Voluntarily converge with EU developments in higher education. They will give this money if you agree to adopt what is happening in European Union countries' higher education systems as somehow your own, to say, yeah, we want to do it like that. Which by and by, most people do anyway, but it's something that could be questioned. Promote people-to-people contacts, intercultural awareness and understanding. Well, I don't believe that European Union universities follow that. on the whole, but it's a nice rhetoric to have. Person to person sounds good. Peer to peer is less good because it means not going through purchasing. Intercultural awareness, recognize prejudices and assumptions in a kind of safe way, and understanding. Well, that could be anything. Carried out in the context of two key policy documents and the policy. Okay, so they've got a policy, a set of links that you can follow up, which we're not going to, but there are more and more of these sites where you can drill down and read more and more of this rhetoric of what intercultural awareness or understanding or so on, and financing these projects. Okay, but what we want to know is what actually, that's the aim. The aims are to do these, and at the level of aims, even like with the course guide where we've got aims for this course, you will come to understand what is critical thinking. They're pretty general. So let's look at what really they are offering. What is the opportunity? It's called What is the Opportunity? Erasmus Plus, I say it with the German accent, I'm trying to anyway. Erasmus Plus, Australian accent. Erasmus Plus provides the opportunity for organizations from eligible partner countries, us, mainly higher education institutions, HEIs, to promote cooperation through actions, that means funded research projects, that improve the quality of higher education and its alignment with labour market needs. That's not all that a higher education should do, vocationalism, but we recognise that that's the rhetoric. And that's why families want their kids to go to university. Go to university, get a job, get a good job. Yeah. Improve the level of skills in higher education institutions through new education programs. Okay. We do have pretty good skills in the university sector, but we can always improve. Do you improve your skills by following the European way? I don't know. Strengthen the capacity of management, governance, and innovation, as well as internationalization. So they're the keys there. If you strengthen management, governance, innovation, and internationalization, you are going to support a certain way of organizing the university according to the best practice, European Union biased international lines. All well and good, but also a forum in which control issues have to be raised. Build the capacity of national authorities to modernize their own higher education systems. Okay, so I don't know, it might be me. That sounds fairly patronizing. Like a European organization is telling a country that was exploited for hundreds of years by Europe that it needs to modernize, right? And the politics of that is slightly problematic. Like we ripped economic profit out of your country for a couple of hundred years, and now you have to modernize. It's like, you know, not the pot calling the kettle black, but there are questions to be raised there, right? Anyway, they're going to have these kind of patronizing statements because they think they're the center of the world still. Foster regional integration and cooperation across the different regions of the world. Yes, lovely. Let's see it. Let's see it. Okay. Capacity building projects typically focus on one or three main activities. Okay, now we're getting to find out what the opportunity is. Curriculum development activities. So that would be things like funding, how we go about developing our curriculum, like perhaps I was doing in the film, looking at ways to respond in more creative formats than the conventional essay, right? So I'm thinking that's interesting. Modernization of governance and management of higher education system. I also think that that's potentially interesting. If we could find ways to govern the university by doing our own audits rather than following the conventions of outside auditing. Strengthen the relations between higher education and the wider economic and social environment. So see, that one, I just see that as kind of reactive against Marxism. I mean, the whole idea of Marxism is that economic and social environment are connected, and it's just that we don't see the connections because we're not thinking critically, and Marxists are supposed to. Yeah, let's do that. Organizations can choose from two types of projects, and we need to know this. Joint projects, which aim to support organizations from partner countries through curriculum development, modernization and management, or structural projects which seek to strengthen higher education systems and promote reforms at national and or regional level. Okay, so we're probably going to go for something in level 1, joint projects, because, well, me anyway, I don't have the background knowledge or the access or the language yet to really get into discussing what national policy is. And you would have to be a party member, you would have to be part of NAFOSTED. Now, someone at TDT, you in the senior management, the research center, might well have that capacity, but not us in our faculty, not yet. How does it work? Organizations intending to apply must do so as part of a consortium. So we need to have a partner country and 2 program countries. So us and 2 countries of the European Union, 2 higher education institutions from the European Union and a higher education institution. Sorry, minimum 1 higher education from at least 2 of the program countries taking part, and minimum 3 higher educations from the partner countries. Okay, so that means we have to partner up with 2 other universities in Vietnam. Okay, so that's also going to be normative, right? But we could bring in 2 other universities here, Dan Toi, for example, in Da Nang, and maybe Humanities and Social Sciences University or Open University here. And anyway, possible. For projects addressing more than 1 partner country, at least 2 eligible partner countries and at least 2 program countries must be involved, blah, 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 blah. Okay, there's eligibility criteria. So you have to show that you're a higher education institution, that you have existed for a certain number of time, that you have all the structures in place for a higher education institution. We don't need to drill down into that just yet, but we know that TDT as a research institution will have all that covered, I think. All right, then there's some more details that we don't need to worry too much about, but it's interesting that organizations from Libya, Syria, and the Russian Federation cannot act as applicants. Why do you think that is? Anyone? I'm a bit shocked that they put it so explicitly. These are the countries at war with Europe at present, right? The war in Libya, well, last year anyway, it's an ongoing terrible civil war in Libya that European Union and NATO effectively caused by assassinating Gaddafi and so on. Syria, where they tried to take out Assad as part of the so-called Arab Sting, and it just degenerated into civil war and the ongoing battle with ISIS. And the Russian Federation, because Russia occupied part of what was then the Ukraine, but was formerly Russia, Sebastopol and the Crimea, and Europe didn't like that. Wow, that's so explicitly political. I'm really surprised that they've included that. Not found a way to disguise the explicit politics of that. If you're from our enemy, we are not going to talk to you. No. Of course, that's what they think, but to actually write it is, well, I wonder what you think about that. Project partners may either be higher education institutions or any public or private organization active in the labor market or in the fields of education, training, and youth. That's interesting because that means private organizations could join in as well. So it's not just universities, it could be a think tank. It could be a company like the research wing of Google or Zallo or something that applied. I wonder if these organizations can participate as full partners or associated partners. Well, I don't actually, like maybe a publisher can be involved, somebody who publishes in the field of education and training. That would be interesting. Yeah. So anyway, what else should you know? Of course, you've got to do a lot of reading to understand these projects. Curriculum development activities. The three-man activities, curriculum development activities, that's repeating. Projects typically last 2 or 3 years, and the grant varies between €500,000 and €1 million. Do I need to translate that into dong? It's a lot. €1 million will be about 80, is it? No. 4, 8, 80? A lot. A lot. I can't do it in my head anymore. Okay, so we have to possess a valid Erasmus Charter for higher education. I think that's accreditation on the European side. We pursue that. So then I went to the site. I have to change this again to look at the offers that are no, cancel. The offers that are on the website and see what they are doing. We'll just have a quick look at that, and that'll be the end for today. Check this out. Okay, so you join the. You have to log in. All right. Then you get to the search page. Okay, so here I am on the search page, search and funding of tenders, funding and tender opportunity. Tender is when you offer to join an action. You say, I'm going to deliver a service. Now, here's the key thing. Right now, many of the regulations for the new EU programs 2001, 2027 are not yet formally adopted by the EU legislator. That will be the European Union government. The content of some of these pages is therefore provisional and may be subject to change. Okay, so let's see. But funders and tenders that are out. So we can scroll through the different offers of projects you could join. Right? And the one about capacity is not yet available. Right? So we're looking at forthcoming. I click on forthcoming. It doesn't change much. So let's take them one by one. Tender, oh no, let's not. But well, there's all sorts of interesting things that are happening in higher education that aren't explicitly researched. This is one, a tender open for submission for someone to provide security services for a delegation of the European Union going to Ethiopia. Like, so the university security might take that up, but that's more like a security company will offer. It's competitive procedure with negotiation due. Well, it's closed already. So anyway, you can get funding for event management. The second one, private sector development, framework contracts, supervision for roads, repair and telecommunication, all sorts of technical and business-oriented ways in which education funding is being deployed to business, basically. Technical assistance in nutrition strategy and plan of action research, right? Restricted process, whatever. So ICT security systems, restricted. A lot of this is just not available to us, right? And so on. But it's interesting to look at what they want to do. Here's a research project on European Union leading the global energy transition. Well, does the European... The next one's fantastic. Security services for the delegation of the European Union to the United Kingdom. They're going to need some security to visit the... Anyway, by the by, let's drill down into one of them. And I've clicked on here now, this tab for the acquisition of anti-COVID material. So here's a call for expression of interest and pre-selection of candidates for a project which would acquire for the European Union. It's open for submission now, like a research project to collect anti-COVID material. I'd be thinking that that's like things like government promotional material, the song that went viral from Vietnam, right? Wash your hands, whatever. Sorry, it's all gonna be the mind worm in your heads now. And we can maybe see the details of this. All right, here it is. I accept cookies. Acquisition of oh, it's in French. How's your French? Le but de cet appareil manifestation d'interest. We're asking for interest in... we're going to have it from a list of pre-selected candidates, contacts for the acquisition of public materials on anti-COVID, right? So call for expression of interest and selecting candidates who could do this research. Reference. I don't know whether clicking on the reference will help us at all. And all we get is a black screen, I'm afraid. Oh, no? Yeah, supplies. All right, oh, that just expresses okay, that's not so interesting, but there's research to be done on COVID. Here's another one. We'll click on this one. The study of media plurality and diversity online. This would be important for studying media ownership. So a real problem for Australia, for example, is most of the media is owned by Rupert Murdoch. And if everything is owned by one person, that means only one perspective across a whole number of different media platforms is being presented. It's why the Facebook monopoly is a problem. It's why the monopoly of IBM was a problem, or the monopoly of CNN or CBC or any of the big networks. Why you want to have competition and diversity in ownership. Here's this research project on exactly this, media plurality. The main objective of this study is to provide the Commission, the European Commission, and national regulators with evidence-based elements to support the analysis of media plurality and diversity online. That sounds good. As well as to assess the suitability of the current media-specific rules to safeguard media pluralism. Sometimes they have rules to ensure that no one person can have a monopoly. It will identify shortcomings of the status quo, put forward possible policy options. Great. The study will focus essentially on two potentially interrelated aspects. A, prominence of findability of general interest content, services, measuring concerning the concentration of economic resources to ensure media plurality and diversity online. Measuring and evaluating what's available. It's not really a critical project, but it's a research team might like to do that, but we'll be going for something more specific. But that's the style of, it's interesting to see the style of research they want, not critical thinking. It's more like information provision and policy. So we really need to think about how our project will look in terms of those values. But of course, have to look more at these things in detail. You drill down a little bit for this one, for diversity online. It just says the same thing. Suitability criteria. But the deadline was a couple of days ago. No, the deadline is late March. But anyway, we won't be applying for this one. That's interesting though. So it's a matter of searching for these funds, but also while you're searching, interpretation services, here's another one, to look at the values, the kind of thing that they are funding already is the kind of thing that they will fund if you ask for money. And something that doesn't fit within this kind of logic probably won't get looked at. You need to speak their language. Here's one on translation, interpretation services. It's interesting. But it goes on and on and on. I would be interested if someone wanted to do a project on exploring this to really see how accessible and interesting or available or understandable, comprehensible this system is to someone who's not an insider. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, so I can find my way around it, but it's not exactly transparent, is it? It's a nightmare of paperwork and bureaucracy. In order to get funding that shapes how research is done, how knowledge is constructed, which determines what kind of staff we have in the university, which then shapes the teaching that happens in the classes. And we need to do analysis of that whole chain if we're really going to understand how our institutions work. Because it's the commons, knowledge is the commons, right? I mean, yeah. I think it's really difficult. It really requires a challenging level of critical thinking and information management, but it's something that we need to do. And I want to set up projects where we do things like that as our research. So next week, we'll talk a little bit about how this will work, how it will work as your midterm, and then we start to talk about what the finals will look like, what the next few weeks will look like. I have a proposal to put to you, which we'll think about looking at not just the university, but other institutions like museums, maybe have a class trip and so on. So as always, comments in the chat, feel free to get into that, or email or on the Google Classroom where there's been some conversation. That's really good. More would be good. And you have a number of assessments for the week that I see are not being done by that many. Please make sure you do those that you're asked for. And I will see you in real life next week. Thank you very much. I will stay online for a while after I close this image and answer any questions if anyone has any. Okay? Good. Okay. Thank you. All right, stop recording now.